What are we doing today?
Today, we have 101 tips for new Scrum Masters.
Let's do this.
Get in.
Read the Scrum Guide
Go on a training course.
and get certified. It's not about the piece of paper.
Join a Scrum Masters group to share ideas.
And start reading. There are so many good books out there.
Become familiar with the Agile Manifesto.
And don't get sucked into all these arguments about which Agile approach is the best.
In fact, embrace all forms of agility.
And don't be dogmatic.
And every day is a school day. Always keep learning.
And remember that Scrum isn't for project management, it's for opportunistic product development.
Trust your team. Remember, the developers do know what they're doing.
And consider drawing up a team charter.
A Scrum team should be cross-functional. That doesn't mean everyone has all the skills to do everything. It means between them, the teams have all the skills that they need.
And remember that a Scrum team is self-managing. So no one tells the developers on a Scrum team how to do the work.
There's no hierarchy on a Scrum team. No senior, no leads, no architect. The whole team shares accountability.
And Scrum teams are typically made of 10 or fewer people. But it's more important that they've got all of the skills required to get the work done.
Empower your teams. If you impose solutions onto them, they won't accept accountability.
And build trust, because without trust, your teams are just going to be going through the motions.
The more responsibility you can give your team, the more creative, flexible, and accountable they will probably be.
And don't forget that the product owner is just as much a part of the Scrum team as you as the Scrum Master are.
Every time a Scrum Master steps in to solve a problem for their team, they are denying that team the opportunity to solve the problem for themselves and learn in the process.
And don't forget that the Scrum Master isn't the master of the Scrum team. They're the master of the Scrum process.
It's okay to fail. However, fail fast and fail cheap.
And learn from your mistakes. Don't make the same mistake twice.
Every sprint, try to make at least one small improvement.
But don't just focus on going faster. Focus on outcomes rather than output.
And focus on value rather than velocity.
And choose your metrics wisely. Don't just focus on velocity because it's easy to measure.
And any metrics that you do choose to measure may end up becoming a target for the team, possibly at the expense of something else that you value more.
Don't just focus on improving tools and technology. Sometimes the biggest gains can come from improvements within the team.
And there's no need to wait until the retrospective to talk about making improvements.
And hold the team accountable for following through on their ideas.
A team that doesn't have anything to talk about at the retrospective potentially has trust issues.
And the biggest impediments that you'll face as a Scrum Master will often be at the organizational level.
Encourage a growth mindset.
And learn to talk about Scrum without using all of the jargon.
Inspire your team. As a servant leader, being right isn't important if your team don't want to follow you.
And if your stakeholders aren't buying into the process, try to understand their perspective rather than just instantly dismissing them.
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio.
Remind the team to focus on the sprint goal. You can't get everything done at once.
Eliminating multitasking is often one of the biggest performance improvements that a team can make.
And encourage the team to speak up when they disagree and then help facilitate that disagreement.
Great teams are comfortable with creative conflict.
And accept that you yourself aren't always going to have all of the answers.
Scrum is about getting stuff done. If you're not getting something done each sprint, you're not doing Scrum.
And don't do big design up front. Scrum teams learn by doing, not talking about doing.
And choose a sprint length that is long enough for the team to deliver something valuable, but short enough that the stakeholders have the opportunity to give feedback.
And don't be afraid to change that sprint length if you need to.
Make your definition of done transparent. Publish it and make sure everyone understands it.
And great Scrum teams are constantly trying to improve what done means for them.
Test often and test early.
And don't leave all of your testing until the end of the sprint.
Try test-driven development. First, write a test which fails and then write the code to make that test pass.
And remember that the team shares the responsibility for getting the work done.
The problem with quick and dirty is that the dirty remains long after the quick has been forgotten.
Stop starting, start finishing.
But don't defer starting until things are perfect. Start now, get perfect later.
And remember, it's not up to the Scrum Master to run the daily Scrum. In fact, the Scrum Master doesn't even need to be there.
You don't have to use the 3 questions in the daily Scrum.
And stick to the time box.
The daily Scrum is by the developers for the developers.
And sprint planning is about what, how, and why. So make sure the team understand the value that they're trying to deliver within the sprint.
Scrum teams always have a sprint goal. It's not optional.
And remember that inspection without transparency is misleading.
And inspection without adaptation is a waste of time.
And as a Scrum Master, you won't always be able to make the changes that you want. However, you can always make things transparent.
If your stakeholders aren't attending your sprint reviews, you aren't validating your assumptions about your work.
And the product owner doesn't have to wait for the sprint review to release work.
And nothing happens in between sprints because we need transparency on the true cost of our work.
Don't wait for the product backlog to be finished because it will never be finished.
Break down your work on the sprint backlog into small tasks so that the developers can easily be transparent about their progress.
And encourage the team to respectfully challenge one another at the daily Scrum.
If the items on your board aren't moving, try dot marking them to raise transparency on flow. If an item has been in progress for 3 days, you probably have an issue with that task.
And you can only really judge your progress towards the product goal by looking at what's done. So make sure that done actually means done.
Deadlines and release dates should be based on what the team can actually deliver, not on what someone else thinks the team should be able to deliver.
And if you try to force a team to work faster, they'll probably accomplish this by cutting quality and doing less testing. And that's not good.
Adding people to a late running project almost always makes it later.
In fact, we want our Scrum teams to be as stable as possible because we don't know what might disrupt them.
Transparency is easy to talk about, but difficult to implement. Always encourage openness and honesty.
You should never be discovering that something isn't done for the first time at the sprint review.
The scope of work in a sprint is not fixed. The sprint goal is fixed.
Good sprint goals are valuable, achievable, and negotiable.
As soon as the team discover that they have undercommitted or overcommitted to work within a sprint, they should collaborate with the product owner and adapt their plan accordingly.
And don't expect a team's velocity to be stable and constant. If it was, we wouldn't need Scrum.
Scrum is for complex work which is inherently unpredictable. Embrace change.
Doing Scrum isn't the aim. Being agile is the aim.
Scrum is a framework. It is supposed to be a container for all of your other processes.
And accept that the world is always changing. You need to run just to keep up. You need to sprint to get ahead.
Scrum is immutable. It's not a cookbook. If you're doing some bits of Scrum, but not others, you're probably not going to get the benefits, and you're certainly not doing Scrum.
Remember that as a Scrum Master, you're a servant leader, or at least a true leader who serves.
And you serve the organization as well as the team.
Be honest about your own shortcomings, but also be positive about what you bring to the team.
When there is a technical decision to be made, always ask the team.
Be patient, but also be resilient.
And when people say, but that's just how we've always done things around here, challenge that.
Always try to understand rather than judge.
And facilitate rather than problem solve.
Ask questions rather than instruct.
Remember that your team is made up of unique people with their own skills, experiences, and problems. Every team is different.
And as a Scrum Master, it's so important to be continuously improving. So consider putting together a backlog for your own personal development and working on something every sprint.